My name's Andrew Tyrrell. I'm the president of the Canadian Caribbean Association of Halton. Back in the 80s, the Canadian Caribbean Association of Halton was a very grassroots organization in that it just had a handful of members, and really it was just an excuse for people of similar backgrounds, the Caribbean, to get together and exchange stories. And mostly it was about exchanging food, because back then we didn't have the Caribbean restaurants that you have right now. And now it is a large not-for-profit, it's a large charity, and it works in the community to assist the community with culture and education, explaining to the Oakville and Halton population that Halton has a rich history in accepting immigrants, Black immigrants and African descent immigrants, and not to lose sight of that history. My parents had moved to Oakville, and they knew about the rich history that Oakville had in regards to the Underground Railroad. But what they didn't know was that it wasn't as popular, or that there were a lot of people that didn't know about it. So my mother took that on to educate the politicians about the Oakville Underground Railroad and the history of freeing slaves. And in regards to that, she became close to the politicians, because she was knocking on doors, and whenever they gave her the time of day, she gave them an earful. And then the organization kind of got a little bit political, like any organization. When you start to get a base and you start to want to change things, you mobilize your base in order to vote. So that's the movement that my mom started up. And then she started different types of programs within the CCH. There were a lot of people that were talking about the mistreatment that police officers gave to the youth, and how they handled the youth and handled Black people. So she started up a youth leadership workshop series, and knocked on the door of the then chief and asked for some money and perhaps a venue to hold the workshop. And she always got very good feedback, and nothing but nodding of head and yes to the police chiefs and the senior officers of the day, and they all jumped in. And that's how the relationship with the Halton Regional Police Service started. It was a natural progression, I would say, is that we started with these youth leadership workshops, and we started with one, and then we got to two, and then there was a senior officer at the time, Larry Brown. He was an inspector at the time, and he led those leadership workshops. The community well-being plan that was enacted in 2019, I believe. It was not something new, and it was not something that was earth-changing or eye-opening to the Halton Police Service. It was simply a document that really codified what they were already doing. So the community well-being plan talks about all of the benefits of really what good community policing is all about. It talks about intervention with youth. It talks about being involved with community, and it talks about arriving at critical incidents and having the perspective that there's other community groups, other people that perhaps don't talk the language, aren't familiar with the culture, and those kinds of things, and arriving at a scene with those perspectives in mind. In 1993, Elizabeth came to my mom and asked for some help in setting up an organization in the North. And it was as a result of the Ku Klux Klan walking through the middle of the street in their full robes. And they had a chapter that was up there, and they let their presence be known. Elizabeth was a resident back then up in the North, and she came to my mom and said, I've got a couple of people together, and we've started this group called the North Community, the North Halton Cultural Awareness Council. North Halton Cultural Awareness Council, and she asked for some assistance in setting up the organization and things that they could do in order to combat this evil presence. And that's where the friendship started. My mom guided that organization and gave them some structure as to how to start the board. And my mom took around Elizabeth and made some introductions with some politicians and police officers as well. And took her to various training sessions, and that's how things started between them. My advice would be that they have every right to be angry and upset about the uprisings as of late. My mother was an activist, and she was, although she was close to a number of organizations, political organizations, municipal agencies such as the police and municipal government, she was also a realist. And there's many times that, even when I served on the Police Services Board, I was raising two young boys who were about to be teenagers and also starting to drive and all that kind of thing. And I realized that even though I sat on the Police Services Board, I was still a Black man serving on the Police Services Board who was raising two Black kids. And I had to raise my two children, two men, about to become men, differently than my white neighbors. I had to explain to them what to do when the police pull you over, put your hands on the wheel, no sudden movements, all of that. And I too, even, for example, when I was on the Police Services Board, I had terrible encounters with Halton Regional Police. And they saw me as maybe a Black man in civilian clothes, where I got a different kind of reception with a police officer when I was dressed like I am today at a police function. So what I would say to people today is, yes, there's no question that you should be angry and that you should be upset, and racism is alive and well in Canada, and it is systemic. But in order to affect that change, you have to work with those systems. You have to give those systems the benefit of your lens and explain to them where they failed and give them some type of guidance for getting better. And in the example of the Halton Regional Police Service, for many years, for decades, they have, at different frequencies of the year, brought together all of the community leaders, sat them down in one room and said, all right, what are you hearing from your demographic, and how is it that we need to get better?